Today we're diving into something deep but totally practical. Healing your karma, integrating your shadow, and transforming into a more whole, purposeful self. If you ever felt stuck in repeating patterns, haunted by old choices, or pulled between who you are and who you want to be, then this episode is for you. Hello Enlightenment Seekers, this is Finding Enlightenment with Jay, and as you may have guessed, I'm Jay. In this video we'll unpack how attention and accountability break sabotage, why gratitude for not being worse softens shame, and how dissolving rigid identities helps you recombine your inner parts into real strength. I'll also guide you through the alchemy of dark and light, reclaiming the call to do what thou wilt, as a path to soul-aligned purpose, and why a Gaia mindset turns personal healing into planetary care. So stick around. By the end you'll have concrete ways to start integrating shadow material and living with more integrity. There's a quiet urgency in the work of inner healing. When I speak of karma, shadow, and transformation, I'm not invoking distant metaphors, but naming the practical architecture of change. This video traces a path from recognizing the patterns that sabotage us to integrating the parts of ourselves that we have long denied. It argues that true freedom does not come from erasing the past, but from learning its language, dissolving its hold, and recombining its energies for a more whole and purposeful life. The journey is both intimate and planetary. It asks us to do the inner work and to orient that work towards a life that serves the self, others, and the living earth. Karma is often misunderstood as a ledger of cosmic punishment and rewards. A more useful way to think about it is an imprint of repeated choices, habits, and related patterns that shape life as it unfolds. These imprints can be subtle. They can show us recurring conflicts, self-limiting beliefs, or the uncanny ability to choose partners, jobs, or situations that replicate old wounds. When left unexamined, these patterns become sabotage. They quietly steer energy away from growth and towards repetition. Healing karma begins with your attention. Attention is the first tool for interpreting authenticity. By noticing the moments when you react from a place that feels old rather than present, you create a space to choose differently. This is not a moralizing exercise, but a practical one. You map the triggers and trace the stories that justify the behavior, and then try to experiment with new responses. Over time, the nervous system learns new pathways, and the old pattern loses its charge. Another essential element is accountability. Healing is not solitary in the sense of isolation. It often requires witnesses, guides, or practices that hold you to a new standard. Rituals, therapy, mentorship, community can all serve as scaffolding. These supports help translate insight into sustained change. When karma is healed in this way, sabotage loses its power, because the subconscious scripts that once ran your life are rewritten into conscious choices. Gratitude is commonly framed as a practice for appreciating abundance. There is a deeper, more paradoxical gratitude that arises when we recognize how far we've come simply because we were not able to be worse. This gratitude is not smug or complacent. It is a sober acknowledgement that survival, resilience, and small acts of courage have kept us from descending into greater harm. It honors the invisible margins that prevented catastrophes. This stance reframes failure and limitation. Instead of seeing every shortcoming as evidence of personal deficiency, you begin to see a lineage of small mercies and hard-won boundaries that have preserved your capacity to change. Gratitude for not being worse cultivates humility. It softens shame and opens the heart to gentler self-correction. When you can be thankful for the ways you were protected from your worst impulses, you create a compassionate inner climate that supports further healing. Gratitude also functions as the corrective to the binary thinking that divides people into saints and sinners. Recognizing that you're not able to be worse invites empathy for others that struggle. It dissolves the harshness of judgment and replaces it with curiosity about the conditions that shape behavior. In this way, gratitude becomes a social as well as personal practice, one that fosters connection rather than isolation. Integration requires a willingness to dissolve rigid identities and recombine their elements into a more flexible whole. The psyche is not a fixed object but a living system, composed of parts that have developed for survival. Some parts are protective, others are wounded, and some are creative. Shadow integration is the process of acknowledging these parts, listening to their needs, and finding ways to incorporate their energy without letting them dominate your life. Dissolution is not annihilation. It is a loosening of identification with a single story about who you are. When you dissolve a grip of limiting identity, you free the energy that was bound to it. That energy can be recombined with other parts to fuel new capacities. For example, the anger that once protected you from being exploited can then be transformed into assertive boundary setting. The fear that kept you small can be redirected into prudent caution that supports wise risk-taking. Practical methods for this work include somatic practices, journaling, active imagination, and guided shadow work. Somatic practices help you feel where energy is held in the body. Journaling can give voices to disowned parts. And active imagination allows for dialogue between inner figures. The goal is not to eliminate darkness, but to make it more legible and useful. When those parts of you are integrated that contribute to a coherent self that is resilient, creative, and morally grounded. True transformation is alchemical. It requires the meeting of dark and light, the conscious reconciliation of what has been hidden with what aspires to be. This is not a cosmetic polishing of the ego. It is a radical reorientation in which the shadow's raw material is transmuted into wisdom and the light's clarity is tempered by humility. The result is a self that is neither brittle nor naive, but capable of holding complexity. The phrase "do what thou wilt" has been interpreted in many ways. In the context of healing and integration, it can be reclaimed as an invitation to discover and enact your soul's true purpose. This is not a license for selfishness. It is a call to align your deepest capacities with your highest values. When you know your purpose, choices become less about avoiding pain and more about contributing meaningfully. Purpose provides a North Star that orientates action, clarifies priorities, and channels energy into sustained effort. Finding that purpose often requires traversing the shadow. The parts of you that were disowned may contain the very gifts that you need. A wound can become a source of empathy. A failure can become a teacher that refines skill. The integration of dark and light can produce a kind of moral imagination that can envision new possibilities for personal and collective flourishing. This would be the ultimate transformation, a life lived with integrity, courage, and a sense of service. Healing at the individual level naturally extends into a more broader ecological and relational ethic. The Gaia mindset is an orientation that recognizes the interdependence of all life and the necessity of aligning human flourishing with planetary health. It asks us to expand our circle of care beyond the self and the immediate community to include ecosystems, species, and future generations. Adopting a Gaia mindset changes how you make decisions. Consumption becomes a moral choice rather than a mere preference. Work becomes a means of contributing to regenerative systems rather than extracting value. Relationships are seen as ecosystems in miniature, requiring attention to balance, reciprocity, and mutual nourishment. This mindset also reframes success. Success is no longer measured solely by accumulation, but by the capacity to sustain life in its many forms. Practically, cultivating a Gaia mindset involves learning an ecological literacy, practicing restraint, and participating in collective efforts that restore rather than deplete. It also involves humility. The earth is not a resource to be dominated, but a living system to be honored. When inner healing is paired with ecological responsibility, transformation becomes durable. The individual who heals in isolation may still perpetuate harm through consumption or indifference. An integrated person that adopts Gaia mindset aligns inner integrity with outward action. Healing, karma, and shadow integration are not esoteric luxuries. They are essential practices for anyone that wants to live with purpose and contribute to a livable future. The path begins with attention and accountability, moves through gratitude for the small mercies that kept us from doing worse, and deepens into the dissolution and recombination of inner parts. Ultimate transformation requires the alchemy of dark and light, and the discovery of a soul-aligned purpose. When that inner work is joined with a Gaia mindset, personal healing becomes a force for planetary regeneration. This is a practical spirituality. It asks for courage, patience, and the willingness to be both tender and rigorous with oneself. It promises no shortcuts. What it does promise is a life that's more whole, more effective, and more deeply connected to the web of life. In the end, the work is more simple and demanding. Know yourself, heal what binds you, integrate what you find, and let that integrated self serve the flourishing of all. If this resonated with you, try one small practice this week. Name a recurring pattern, thank yourself for surviving it, and then take one tiny step to respond differently. Drop a comment with something you might try. Share a moment that you've integrated, and if you want more episodes like this, like and subscribe. Namaste. Let's keep finding enlightenment together.